Station Omega-9 floated in the void like a metallic tumor against the star-speckled darkness, and if you squinted just right, which nobody ever did because squinting in space was generally considered a waste of time, it almost looked respectable. Almost. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The Galactic Wildlife Preserve had seen better decades. But then again, so had most things that dealt with housing the galaxy's most enthusiastic flesh-eaters on a daily basis. Inside the station's pristine white corridors, where the air recyclers hummed their eternal mechanical lullabies and the artificial gravity kept everyone's feet pointed in roughly the same direction, chaos was about to unfold in the most spectacularly predictable way possible. Dr. Nithara's crystalline form clicked and chimed against the laboratory floor as she moved between monitoring stations, her translucent blue body catching and refracting the overhead lights into tiny rainbows that nobody appreciated because they were all too busy trying not to become something's lunch. Her species, the crystallines, were known throughout the galaxy for their methodical approach to science, their unshakable calm under pressure, and their complete inability to understand why other species found their constant musical tinkling annoying during important meetings. "Bolthak, please confirm the morning head count for Sector 5, she chimed, her voice carrying the musical quality that made her sound like a wind chime having an anxiety attack. Bolthak, who stood roughly 8 feet tall and possessed the general build of a mountain that had decided to take up bodybuilding, lumbered over to the nearest console. His Krogian heritage meant he was built for intimidation first and thinking second, though he'd been working very hard on reversing that order ever since his promotion to head of security. The fact that he needed reading glasses to see the display screens somewhat undermined his fearsome appearance, but nobody had the heart, or the death wish, to mention it. "Running the scan now, Doctor," he rumbled, his voice like gravel being processed in a cement mixer. His massive fingers, each roughly the size of a human forearm, danced across the control panel with surprising delicacy. "Everything looks—" "Wait." The rumbling stopped. "That's not right." Wispiana skittered over from her position near the environmental controls, her 8 legs moving in perfect coordination across the floor. Her arachnoid species had mastered the art of being simultaneously graceful and absolutely terrifying, which served them well in their chosen careers as technical specialists. She could disassemble a quantum processor with 6 hands while using the other 2 to fix herself a sandwich, though she preferred her meals considerably more alive and struggling than most species found appetizing. "What is it?" she clicked, mandibles working nervously. "Please tell me it's just a sensor malfunction. Please tell me we haven't had another incident with the Thornback Devourers again. I just finished repairing the blast doors from the last time someone forgot to lock their cage properly." Bolthak's reading glasses slipped down his massive snout as he leaned closer to the display. "Sector 5, Sub-Containment Unit 12. The Shadowfang Cubs." He paused, and in that pause, the entire future of the station seemed to hang by a thread made of pure dread. "They're gone." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe itself was taking a moment to consider whether this was really the direction it wanted things to go. It was broken, eventually, by the sound of Dr. Nithara's crystalline body producing a noise that could only be described as the musical equivalent of someone having a complete nervous breakdown. "Gone?" she chimed, her voice climbing several octaves into registers that hurt to listen to. "Gone how? Gone where? Gone in the sense that they've been relocated, or gone in the sense that we're all about to become very expensive organic fertilizer. Shadowfang cubs were not, by any reasonable definition, cubs. They were roughly the size of small vehicles, possessed teeth that could bite through reinforced titanium, and came from a death world called Grimholt, where the trees grew backwards and the rain fell upwards just to spite anyone foolish enough to visit. The fact that they were still technically juveniles was a piece of information that generally made people feel worse rather than better about the situation. "The containment field is intact," Wispana reported, her technical scanner painting her face with blue light as she worked. "Energy barriers are functioning at full capacity. Motion sensors show no breaches. It's like they just vanished." "Vanished?" Dr. Nithara repeated, and her voice had taken on the quality of someone who was working very hard not to panic, while simultaneously preparing detailed plans for exactly how she was going to panic once she had a free moment. "Creatures the size of hovercars don't just vanish, Wispana. They relocate, usually to places where there are soft, squishy things they can eat." It was at this precise moment of mounting terror that Hank Garrison chose to shuffle into the main laboratory, carrying a mop bucket that had seen better centuries and wearing the expression of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that the universe was generally uncooperative. He was human, which already made him something of an oddity on the station, and he possessed that particularly human quality of remaining completely unfazed by things that should, by all rights, cause any sensible being to question their life choices. "Morning, folks," he said, setting down his mop bucket with a wet thunk that somehow managed to sound cheerful. "Anyone seen my work boots? Left them outside my quarters last night, but they've gone walkabout." The three alien researchers turned to stare at him with the kind of unified incredulity that suggested they were all having the same thought simultaneously. And that thought was probably something along the lines of, how can this human be worried about footwear when we're facing a potential station-wide catastrophe? "Your boots," Dr. Nithara said slowly, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone addressing a person who might be suffering from severe head trauma, "are missing." "Yep," Hank confirmed, apparently oblivious to the fact that everyone else in the room looked like they were attending their own funeral. "Good boots, too. Had them for about 6 years now. Comfortable, waterproof, steel-toed. Perfect for this kind of work." He gestured around the laboratory with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. "Hank," Bolthak said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was trying very hard to be patient, "we have a situation. 6 Shadowfang cubs have escaped from maximum security containment." "Ah," Hank said, nodding thoughtfully. "That explains the noise last night." The silence returned, but this time it brought friends. It brought implications. It brought the slowly dawning realization that perhaps these two missing item situations were not, in fact, unrelated coincidences. "What noise?" Wispiana asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. "Oh, you know," Hank said, wringing out his mop with practiced efficiency. "Scratching, bumping around, bit of growling. Thought it was the ventilation system acting up again. This old station makes all kinds of sounds." Dr. Nithara's crystalline form began to emit a high-pitched whine that was either the beginning of a complete breakdown or the charging cycle of some kind of weapon. "You heard growling outside your quarters, and you thought it was the ventilation system?" "Well," Hank said reasonably, "have you heard the ventilation system lately? Sometimes I'm not sure there isn't something living in there." He paused, considering. "Actually, now that I think about it, there probably is something living in there. This is a wildlife preserve, after all." Bolthak was staring at the human with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching someone juggle live grenades. "And you didn't think to report this?" "Report what? Noisy ventilation?" Hank shrugged. "I've worked maintenance on 14 different stations, and they all sound like they're haunted by the ghosts of angry machinery. You learn to sleep through it." The alarm system chose that moment to join the conversation, filling the laboratory with the kind of urgent wailing that suggested everyone should probably be running toward the nearest escape pods. Red lights began flashing in patterns that were either designed to convey critical information or to trigger seizures in susceptible species. "Lockdown initiated," the station's artificial intelligence announced in the overly calm voice that all emergency systems used when delivering terrible news. "Multiple containment breaches detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." "Breaches?" Dr. Nithara's voice cracked like glass under pressure. "Multiple breaches? What else is loose?" Wispiana's scanner began beeping frantically as she swept it across the room. "I'm reading life signs. Everywhere. It's like the entire station is crawling with uncontained specimens." "Or," Hank said thoughtfully, still mopping, "maybe they're just excited about something. Animals get worked up when there's a disturbance in their routine. Pack hunters especially. They like to stick together when they're exploring new territory." All three aliens turned to look at him again, and this time their expressions had moved past incredulity and well into the territory of wondering whether humans possessed some kind of death wish that manifested as supernatural calm in the face of obvious danger. "Pack hunters," Bolthak repeated slowly, "exploring new territory." "Sure," Hank said. "Cubs are curious. They like to investigate things, play with stuff they haven't seen before, probably having the time of their lives." He paused in his mopping to look up at them. "You know, if you're all that worried about it, I could take a look around. I mean, after I finish the floors. Maintenance schedule doesn't stop for missing predators." And with that, Hank Garrison continued mopping, humming quietly to himself, while three of the galaxy's finest xenobiologists stood frozen in terror, wondering how their carefully ordered scientific world had suddenly become a situation where a human janitor was offering to hunt down escaped apex predators as a favor between floor cleanings. The red lights kept flashing, the alarm kept wailing, and somewhere in the depths of Station Omega-9, 6 creatures designed by evolution to be perfect killing machines were probably having the most fun they'd had since leaving their home world. It was going to be a very long day. The next hour aboard Station Omega-9 unfolded with all the careful precision of a controlled explosion, which is to say it was loud, chaotic, and left everyone involved wondering how they'd ended up in their current predicament. Dr. Nithara had transformed from a respected xenobiologist into something resembling a crystalline tornado of scientific anxiety. She clutched her data pad like it contained the secrets to eternal life, which, given their current situation, it very well might. Her normally melodious chimes had devolved into something that sounded like a broken music box having an argument with a set of wind chimes. "Bolthak, I need a full spectral analysis of Sector 5, she announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with creatures that considered most species to be mobile snack foods. "Run it through the quantum resonance detector, the biosignature mapper, and the temporal displacement scanner." The temporal displacement scanner? Bolthak's massive eyebrows, which looked like someone had glued patches of steel wool to his forehead, rose in confusion. "Doctor, with respect, temporal displacement technology has been theoretical for the past 3 centuries. "I know what I said," Dr. Nithara chimed back, her crystalline form practically vibrating with stress. 6 apex predators don't just disappear from maximum security containment without violating several laws of physics. If we've got a temporal anomaly on our hands, I want to know about it before we all end up as footnotes in some other dimension's history books. Meanwhile, Wispana had deployed what appeared to be half the station's technical equipment in her quest to understand how their security system had failed so spectacularly. Her 8 arms moved in perfect coordination, adjusting sensors, calibrating scanners, and occasionally pausing to consume the small maintenance spider bots that wandered too close to her work area. "I'm reviewing the security footage from last night," she clicked, mandibles working nervously as multiple screens flickered to life around her workstation. The timestamps show normal activity until approximately 0300 hours. Then, she paused, all 8 eyes focusing on a single monitor. "That's impossible." "What's impossible?" Dr. Nithora skittered over, her crystalline feet creating a sound like someone playing a xylophone while running for their life. "Look at this." Wispana pointed to the screen with 3 different appendages simultaneously. The cubs appeared to be phasing through the energy barriers. One moment, they're in containment. The next, they're walking through solid energy fields like they're made of mist. Bolthak lumbered over, his security training warring with his basic understanding of physics. Energy barriers don't work that way. Matter can't just pass through them. It's like walking through a wall. "Unless," Dr. Nithara said, in a voice that suggested she was either experiencing a breakthrough or a complete mental breakdown, "we're dealing with creatures that have developed interdimensional capabilities. Shadowfangs are from a death world. What if prolonged exposure to their native environment has given them abilities we never documented?" It was at this moment that Hank chose to wander past the laboratory entrance, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies and wearing the expression of a man who had somehow achieved perfect zen despite being surrounded by barely controlled chaos. He paused, glanced at the screens showing the supposedly impossible security footage, and nodded thoughtfully. "Oh, that," he said, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Yeah, I meant to mention that. There's a maintenance gap in the containment field. Been meaning to fix it for about a week now, but I keep getting distracted." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe itself was taking a moment to process what it had just witnessed. It was the silence of 3 brilliant scientific minds simultaneously realizing that their elaborate theories about interdimensional phasing and temporal anomalies might need some revision. "A maintenance gap," Dr. Nithara repeated, her voice flat with the kind of disbelief that came from discovering that your carefully constructed worldview had just been demolished by someone with a mop. "Yeah, pretty standard stuff," Hank continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he had just single-handedly destroyed several hours of theoretical xenobiology. "The energy emitters drift out of alignment sometimes. Creates little gaps in the field matrix. Nothing dangerous for the big specimens, but something small and flexible could squeeze through if they really wanted to." "Small and flexible," Bolthak echoed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was beginning to suspect that the universe had a sense of humor, and it wasn't particularly kind. "Cubs are basically liquid when they want to be," Hank said cheerfully. "Saw it all the time back on the research stations. Young predators can compress their skeletal structure, dislocate joints temporarily. Evolutionary advantage. Lets them hide in spaces that adult predators can't reach." Wispiana's technical scanner began beeping frantically as she processed this information. "You're telling us that our maximum security containment system has been compromised by basic maintenance issues?" "Well, When you put it like that, it sounds bad, Hank said. But really, it's more like aggressive structural flexibility meeting temporary field instability. He paused, considering. Also, I might have left my tool bag near the containment unit yesterday. Sometimes the curious ones like to investigate new smells. The three aliens exchanged glances that conveyed volumes about their current state of mind, most of which could be summarized as, "We are highly trained professionals, and yet we are being educated about containment protocols by a human with a mop." "Your tool bag," Dr. Nithara said slowly, "smells interesting to them?" "Oh, sure," Hank replied, beginning to move along with his cleaning cart. "Especially the leather portions. Reminds them of prey animals, I'd guess. Gets them all worked up and exploratory." As Hank disappeared around the corner, his humming fading into the distance, the three researchers were left to contemplate the fact that their carefully planned investigation had just been reduced to human left interesting smelling objects near inadequately maintained containment fields. "Right," Dr. Nithara said after a long moment. Let's continue the search." The next phase of their investigation took on the quality of a very expensive game of hide-and-seek, played by professionals who were beginning to suspect that they weren't as good at this game as they'd previously believed. Bolthak had armed himself with enough security equipment to outfit a small military unit. He moved through the station's corridors with the careful precision of someone who expected to encounter something with more teeth than strictly necessary at any moment. His scanner swept continuously, searching for the biosignatures of creatures that were, theoretically, the most dangerous things on the station. "I'm getting readings," he reported through his communication device, his voice tight with concentration. "Heat signatures in Section C, but they keep moving. Fast." "How fast?" Dr. Nithara's voice crackled back through the comm system. "Faster than anything that size should be able to move in a confined space," Bolthak replied, watching his scanner as the readings flickered and danced across the display. "They're not moving like they're hunting. They're moving like they're playing." Meanwhile, Wispana had discovered evidence of the cubs' presence throughout the station, and that evidence was not encouraging for anyone who valued their personal property. The commissary had been thoroughly investigated, with several chairs reduced to what could generously be called artistic interpretations of furniture. The recreation area showed signs of what appeared to be an extremely vigorous game of tug-of-war, using a ping-pong table as the rope. "They've been everywhere," she reported, her scanner painting everything with blue light as she documented the destruction. "Bite marks on the furniture, claw scores on the walls, what appears to be saliva on most horizontal surfaces." "Saliva?" Dr. Nithara's voice climbed several octaves. "Are they marking territory?" "Either that, or they're having the time of their lives," Wispana replied. "Some of this damage looks almost playful." It was Bolthak who made the next disturbing discovery. He'd been following what he thought was a trail of disturbed dust patterns, when he realized that the trail led directly to the residential quarters. More specifically, it led to the corridor where most of the station's personnel lived. "Doctor," he said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who was trying very hard not to panic, "I think we have a bigger problem." "Define bigger," came the reply. "The cubs aren't just loose in the station. They're loose in the residential section." The pause that followed was filled with the sound of three different species simultaneously contemplating their mortality. "How many personnel are in their quarters right now?" Dr. Nithara asked. "Most of the night shift is sleeping," Bolthak replied, consulting his duty roster. "About 60% of the crew." And they don't know that we have 6 apex predators roaming the halls outside their bedrooms? Well, Bolthak said slowly, when you put it like that. It was at this moment that they heard the sound, a long, low howl that echoed through the station's ventilation system like the voice of some ancient, terrible thing that had decided to announce its presence to the universe. It was followed by another howl, and then another, until the entire station seemed to vibrate with the calls of 6 creatures expressing what could only be described as pure, unfiltered joy. "They're singing?" Wispana asked, her voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose understanding of predator behavior was undergoing rapid revision. "That's not singing," Bolthak said grimly. "That's pack coordination. They're communicating with each other." "About what?" Dr. Nithara demanded. Before anyone could answer, Hank's voice drifted from somewhere down the corridor, barely audible over the ventilation system, but unmistakably cheerful. All right. Settle down in there. Some of us are trying to work." The howling stopped. Immediately. Complete silence returned to Station Omega-9, broken only by the hum of life support systems and the sound of 3 alien researchers trying to process what they'd just witnessed. "Did he just—" Dr. Nithara began. "It sounded like he—" Wispana continued. "They listened to him," Bolthak finished. And in the growing silence that followed, they all began to suspect that their understanding of both human behavior and apex predator psychology was about to undergo some significant adjustments. What followed could best be described as the most professionally executed panic in the history of interspecies cooperation, which was impressive considering that most interspecies cooperation usually ended with someone being digested. Dr. Nithara had reached that particular state of scientific hysteria where everything became a potential breakthrough or catastrophe, often simultaneously. She'd established a command center in the main laboratory, surrounded by enough monitoring equipment to track a small moon's orbital patterns, and was treating the situation with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for preventing galactic wars. "I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in sectors A through F," she announced, her crystalline form practically humming with nervous energy. "The Cubs are somehow masking their biosignatures using principles we don't understand." The truth, which nobody had bothered to ask Hank about, was considerably more mundane. The Cubs had discovered that rolling around in the laundry facilities made them smell like industrial detergent, which confused most scanner systems that were designed to detect organic signatures rather than creatures that smelled like they'd been processed through a cleaning facility. Bolthak had taken a different approach to the crisis. He'd armed himself with enough weaponry to outfit a small invasion force and was moving through the station's corridors with the careful precision of someone who expected to encounter something with entirely too many teeth at any moment. His scanner swept continuously, painting the walls with sensor beams that should have detected anything larger than a maintenance drone. "Still getting phantom readings," he reported through his comm unit, his voice tight with the kind of professional paranoia that came from dealing with creatures that considered most galactic species to be mobile meals. "Heat signatures appearing and disappearing, but no visual confirmation." What he was actually detecting was the Cubs playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek throughout the station's service tunnels. They'd discovered that the maintenance shafts provided an excellent network of hiding places, and had been using them to move around the station like furry, oversized, extremely dangerous children playing in the world's most expensive playground. Wispiana had established herself in the security center, surrounded by monitors showing feeds from every camera on the station. Her 8 eyes moved independently, tracking different screens simultaneously, while her additional arms operated multiple control systems. She was witnessing things that challenged her understanding of both physics and predator behavior. I keep seeing shadows moving in the peripheral feeds, she clicked, mandibles working nervously as she replayed security footage. But when I switch to direct camera angles, there's nothing there. The explanation, which would have been obvious to anyone who'd spent time around playful animals, was that the cubs had learned to avoid the cameras. They'd figured out the blind spots in the surveillance system and were using them like a highway system to move around the station undetected. It was less advanced stealth capabilities and more really good at playing hide-and-seek. Meanwhile, Hank continued his maintenance rounds with the kind of supernatural calm that suggested he was either completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding around him or possessed some kind of Zen-like acceptance of the universe's tendency toward chaos. He'd been seen having what appeared to be conversations with empty corridors, leading some to suspect that the stress of the situation was affecting his mental state. Hank, Dr. Nithara had cornered him near the hydroponics bay, where he was calmly watering plants while the rest of the station descended into controlled panic. "Are you feeling all right?" "Oh, sure," Hank replied, adjusting the nutrient flow to a particularly large fern. "Bit tired, maybe. Haven't been sleeping as well as usual." "And the talking to empty spaces?" she asked carefully, in the tone of someone addressing a person who might be experiencing a complete psychological breakdown. "Talking to empty spaces?" Hank looked genuinely confused. "Oh, you mean when I was telling those cubs to keep it down? They were making a racket in the vents above my quarters." Dr. Nithara's crystalline form began to emit the high-pitched whine that indicated either extreme stress or the charging cycle of some kind of weapon. "You can hear them in the vents?" "Well, sure," Hank said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. 6 young predators playing around in metal ductwork? They're not exactly stealthy. Sounds like someone's installed a drum kit in the ceiling. And you told them to be quiet. Sure did. Some of us have work to do. And they listened? Hank paused in his plant maintenance to consider this question. Well, they settled down for a while. Cubs are like that. Lots of energy, but they crash hard when they get tired. The pause that followed was the kind of pause that suggested the universe was taking a moment to consider whether this particular conversation was really happening, or if it was some kind of elaborate stress-induced hallucination. "Hank," Dr. Nithara said slowly, "these are apex predators from a death world. They don't respond to verbal commands from unknown species." "Unknown species?" Hank looked genuinely surprised. "I've been here 3 months. I feed them treats sometimes when you folks aren't looking. They know me." And with that casual revelation, Hank had managed to demolish another carefully constructed piece of xenobiological theory, this time involving the concept that apex predators maintained strict behavioral protocols regarding interspecies interaction. The investigation took on an increasingly surreal quality as the hours passed. The aliens' sophisticated equipment kept detecting impossible things. Creatures that could phase through matter, disappear from scanners, and apparently respond to verbal commands from maintenance personnel. "I'm reading massive biosignature spikes in Section D," Bolthak reported, his voice carrying the tight control of someone who was beginning to question whether his training had adequately prepared him for his current situation. "Whatever they're doing in there, it's getting their metabolisms extremely excited." What they were actually doing was playing tug-of-war with what appeared to be a large boot, though Bolthak's scanners interpreted the elevated heart rates and increased body temperature as signs of predatory excitement rather than recreational activity. "Should I move in for visual confirmation?" he asked. "Negative," Dr. Nithara's voice crackled back. We don't know what kind of feeding behavior we might interrupt. Maintain surveillance distance. The comedy of errors continued throughout the afternoon. Wispana discovered that the cubs' tracking chips were somehow being cloaked by unknown technology, when in reality they were just buried under a pile of Hank's dirty laundry that he'd been meaning to take to the cleaning facilities. The chips were working perfectly. They were just telling everyone that 6 apex predators were currently located in a laundry basket, which seemed too ridiculous to be true. The signals keep coming from Hank's quarters, Wispana reported, staring at her scanner with the kind of confusion that came from having reality consistently refuse to match up with expectations. But that's impossible. He's been working around the station all day. Maybe they've established a den site, Dr. Nithara suggested, though her voice carried the uncertainty of someone whose expertise was being challenged by circumstances that didn't appear in any textbook. In a human's living quarters? Predators are opportunistic. If they've found a location that provides shelter and resources. Neither of them wanted to finish that particular line of reasoning, because it led to conclusions about what might constitute resources in a human's living quarters that were too disturbing to contemplate. The station's automated systems had begun registering what the computer classified as anomalous environmental disturbances. Lights flickered in patterns that suggested either systematic electrical failures or something very large moving through the infrastructure. The environmental controls kept adjusting to compensate for unexplained temperature variations. The waste management system had logged several incidents of foreign objects clogging the recycling processors. It's like they're taking the station apart piece by piece, Wispana observed, watching as another system alert appeared on her screens, methodically destroying our infrastructure. Or, Hank said, appearing suddenly behind her with a toolbox in hand, they're teething. All 8 of Wispana's eyes focused on him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for examining particularly dangerous specimens. Teething? Young predators do that, Hank explained patiently. Their adult teeth come in, their jaws itch, so they chew on things. Back home, puppies chew up shoes and furniture. Guess when you scale that up to creatures the size of small vehicles, they go for infrastructure. They're chewing on our infrastructure because their teeth hurt. Well, probably, Hank said. That, or they're bored. Intelligent species need mental stimulation. Lock them up in a box all day, and they'll find ways to entertain themselves. He paused, considering. Usually ways that involve destroying whatever's handy. As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed through the station's ventilation system. A rhythmic thumping that could have been machinery malfunctioning, or could have been something very large playing drums with pieces of station equipment. Are they, Dr. Nithara began. Playing music? Hank finished. Wouldn't surprise me. Social species, pack hunters, they like group activities. The thumping was joined by what sounded like harmonic howling, creating a symphony that was either the most beautiful expression of interspecies artistic collaboration in galactic history, or the sound of 6 apex predators coordinating for something that would end very badly for everyone involved. I think, Bolthak said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent the day chasing shadows and was beginning to suspect that he was the victim of an elaborate practical joke. We need to talk to Hank. Talk to me about what? Hank asked cheerfully. About how you seem to know more about what these creatures are doing than our combined scientific expertise and advanced monitoring equipment. Hank considered this for a moment, then shrugged. Well, when you put it like that, I suppose we should probably go check on them. Make sure they haven't gotten into anything too important. And with that casual suggestion, delivered in the tone of someone proposing they check whether it might rain later. Hank had managed to reduce their galaxy-threatening crisis to the level of a minor household inconvenience that could be resolved with a simple inspection. The three alien researchers exchanged glances that conveyed their growing suspicion that their understanding of crisis management was about to undergo some significant revisions. The march to Hank's quarters had all the dramatic tension of a funeral procession, if funeral processions typically involved heavily armed security personnel, portable scanning equipment, and the kind of professional dread that came from suspecting you were about to discover something that would haunt your dreams for the foreseeable future. Dr. Nithara led the procession, her crystalline form chiming with anxiety, as she carried enough scientific equipment to establish a small research station. Bolthak flanked her, weapons ready, his massive frame casting shadows that suggested he was prepared for anything up to and including a small war. Wispana brought up the rear, her 8 legs moving in perfect coordination while her arms operated multiple scanners simultaneously. Hank walked alongside them with the casual air of someone who'd been invited to show off his stamp collection, completely oblivious to the fact that his 3 companions were mentally preparing themselves to document what might be the most gruesome crime scene in the station's history. "Now, before we go in," Dr. Nithara said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering last rites, "I want everyone to be prepared for what we might find. 6 apex predators, unsupervised, in an enclosed space with—" She paused, glancing at Hank. "With potential prey items." "Prey items?" Hank looked genuinely confused. "You mean, like my furniture?" "We're hoping it's just your furniture," Bolthak rumbled, his hand resting on what appeared to be some kind of plasma rifle designed for situations that had gone beyond merely bad and well into catastrophic. They reached the door to Hank's quarters, and Dr. Nithara's scanner immediately began emitting the kind of urgent beeping that suggested it had detected something that violated several laws of physics. "Massive biosignatures," she whispered, "all 6 of them, and they're active." From inside the quarters came a sound that could best be described as controlled chaos, thumping, scratching, and what sounded suspiciously like growling, mixed with something that might have been laughter if apex predators were capable of such things. "Right," Hank said, reaching for the door controls. "Let's see what they've gotten up to." "Wait," all 3 aliens said simultaneously, their voices creating a harmony of panic that would have been impressive under different circumstances. "Shouldn't we prepare?" Wispana asked, her mandibles clicking nervously. "Establish a containment protocol? Set up emergency barriers?" "Oh, they're fine," Hank said dismissively. "Probably just playing with something they found." He paused the door controls. "Although, now that I think about it, I hope they haven't gotten into my spare uniforms. Those things are a pain to replace." The door slid open with the soft hiss of equalizing air pressure, and what greeted them was a scene that would require significant revisions to several textbooks on xenobiology, apex predator behavior, and the general nature of reality itself. 6 Shadowfang cubs, each roughly the size of a small hover car, possessing teeth designed to bite through reinforced titanium, and bred on a world where everything tried to kill everything else as a matter of basic principle, were engaged in what could only be described as the most enthusiastic game of tug-of-war in galactic history. The object of their attention was a pair of work boots that had clearly seen better decades. The cubs had arranged themselves in 2 teams of 3, each team gripping one boot with the kind of determined concentration usually reserved for matters of life and death. They pulled and growled and play snarled, their tails wagging with enough force to knock over furniture, while what remained of Hank's living space bore witness to what appeared to have been several hours of the most destructive fun possible. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe itself had paused to consider whether this was really the direction it wanted reality to go. There, Dr. Nithara began, her voice barely above a whisper. Playing, Wispana finished, her 8 eyes wide with disbelief. With your boots, Bolthak added, his plasma rifle lowering as his brain struggled to process what it was witnessing. Well, yes, Hank said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. I did mention they'd gone missing. He stepped into his quarters, carefully navigating around the ongoing tug-of-war match. All right, you lot, that's enough. Give those back. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiological circles for decades to come, though most of the discussions would center around whether the witnesses had been suffering from some kind of shared hallucination. The 6 apex predators, creatures that had been bred by evolution to be perfect killing machines, that came from a world where mercy was a concept that led to rapid extinction, immediately stopped their game and looked at Hank with expressions that could only be described as guilty. One of them, slightly larger than the others, made a sound that was part whine, part growl, and entirely apologetic. Oh, don't give me that look, Hank said, though his tone suggested he wasn't actually angry. You know better than to take things without asking. He held out his hand. Come on, hand them over. The larger cub, after what appeared to be a moment of internal debate, carefully picked up one of the boots and padded over to Hank, dropping it at his feet with the kind of gentle precision that suggested it was trying very hard not to damage the item any further. Good boy, Hank said, patting the creature on what might generously be called its head, though it looked more like a collection of teeth held together by muscle and attitude. Now the other one. The remaining cubs engaged in what appeared to be a brief negotiation, conducted entirely in growls and meaningful looks, before the smallest of them carefully retrieved the second boot and delivered it with the same apologetic precision. Thank you, Hank said, examining the boots with the kind of casual interest he might show for the weather report. Well, they're a bit slobbery, but nothing a good cleaning won't fix. The 3 alien researchers stood frozen in the doorway, their combined scientific expertise struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Dr. Nithara found her voice. How? She asked, the single word carrying the weight of confusion that came from watching someone casually accomplish the impossible. How what? Hank asked, sitting down to examine his boots more closely. The cubs arranged themselves around him in a loose circle, like oversized puppies waiting for attention. How are you? How do they? She gestured helplessly at the scene before her. These are apex predators from a death world. They don't respond to verbal commands. They don't play games. They don't feel guilt. Says who? Hank asked reasonably. Intelligent species are intelligent species. Doesn't matter what planet they're from, or how many teeth they have. Young ones are curious, they like to play, and they respond to consistent boundaries. He scratched one of the cubs behind what might have been an ear. These fellows have just been cooped up too long without proper stimulation. Proper stimulation, Bolthak repeated, his voice flat with disbelief. Sure, look at them. They're juveniles of a social species. In the wild, they'd be learning to hunt, exploring their territory, playing with their pack mates. You've got them locked in a box with nothing to do but stare at walls. Hank shrugged. Of course, they're going to get into mischief when they find a way out. Wispana's scanner had been beeping frantically throughout this conversation, and she finally looked down at it with the kind of confusion that came from having technology consistently refuse to match reality. According to my readings, They should be displaying aggressive territorial behavior. Instead, they're— She paused, consulting the display again. They're exhibiting play patterns consistent with domesticated companion animals. Well, Hank said, animals respond to how you treat them. Treat them like monsters. They'll act like monsters. Treat them like the intelligent young creatures they are. He gestured to the 6 cubs, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a group grooming session. This is what you get. Dr. Nithara's crystalline form had stopped chiming altogether, which was either a very good sign or a very bad sign, depending on your perspective. You're telling us, she said slowly, that you've somehow domesticated 6 apex predators from a death world by treating them nicely? Domesticated is a strong word, Hank replied. More like established mutual respect. They know I'm not a threat. I know they're just young animals trying to figure out their place in the world. We get along fine. And the security breach? Bolthak asked. The station-wide crisis? The potential catastrophe we've been dealing with all day? Hank looked genuinely surprised. Crisis? They just wanted to explore a bit, stretch their legs. Probably would have gone back to their kennel on their own once they got bored. He paused, considering. Though I suppose finding my boots gave them something more interesting to do. The largest of the cubs had apparently decided that the conversation had gone on long enough without proper attention being paid to him. He padded over to Hank and gently butted his head against the human's shoulder, making a sound that was part purr, part rumble, and entirely affectionate. Yes, yes, Hank said, patting the creature with the same casual affection he might show to any pet. You're very impressive, very scary. Now, what do you say we get you all back where you belong before someone decides to file a report about this? The cubs, as if they understood every word, began moving toward the door in a loose formation that suggested they were perfectly willing to cooperate with this plan. They paused at the doorway, looking back at Hank with expressions that managed to convey both apology and hope that this might happen again sometime. Go on, Hank said, making shooing motions with his hands. Back to your kennel, and no more midnight adventures. Understood? The cubs filed out of his quarters with the kind of orderly behavior that would have made a military drill instructor proud, leaving behind 3 alien scientists whose understanding of apex predator behavior had just been comprehensively demolished by a human with a mop and a pair of slobbery work boots. I think, Dr. Nithara said finally, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone whose worldview had just undergone significant reconstruction, we may need to revise some of our containment protocols. And our understanding of interspecies dynamics, Wispana added. And our definition of crisis, Bolthak finished. Well, Hank said, standing up and brushing off his uniform, if you folks want to discuss policy revisions, that's your business. But right now, I've got floors to clean and a pair of boots that need a good washing. And with that, Hank Garrison walked out of his quarters, leaving 3 of the galaxy's most qualified xenobiologists to contemplate the fact that sometimes the most complex problems had the simplest solutions, and that the universe's most dangerous predators might just be misunderstood youngsters in need of a patient friend and some decent entertainment. In the distance, the sound of 6 apex predators settling down for a nap echoed through the station's corridors, and Station Omega-9 returned to its normal routine of housing the galaxy's most dangerous creatures under the supervision of beings who were beginning to suspect that they still had a lot to learn about the nature of danger itself.